You are in ancient Egypt, 1450 BCE, living as a common farmer in a small village along the Nile. Your status is humble, your days long, and your future at the mercy of gods who seem to have forgotten you. The scorching heat pierced through the thin reed roof of Kentus's modest hut, rousing him before the sun had fully risen. His eyes stung from the dust that had settled during the night, a constant companion in this harsh land. The coarse linen of his bed scratched against his skin. Another reminder that comfort was a luxury reserved for those born under kinder stars. Rising with a groan, Kenty could already feel the weight of the day pressing down upon his shoulders. At 30 summers, his body bore the marks of a lifetime spent toiling under Ra's merciless gaze. His muscles ached with a familiarity that had become almost comforting. Pain was predictable in a world where so much else was not. Another day. To survive, he murmured, reaching for the simple shenty, the linen cloth that would be his only protection against the blistering heat. No matter how light the fabric, by midday it would cling to his skin, soaked with sweat and coated with the omnipresent dust. Outside, the village was stirring. Children with distended bellies and flies gathering at the corners of their eyes ran between the closely packed mud brick homes. Women balanced clay pots on their heads, making their way to the Nile for the morning's water. The air already shimmered with heat, though the day had barely begun. Kenty stepped out, inhaling deeply. The scent of the river life, giving yet fetid, mingled with the aromas of dung fires and baking bread. His bare feet found the familiar path, navigating around fresh animal droppings and the occasional sharp stone. Calluses had formed a second. Skin on his soles, yet even they could not fully protect against the ground that would soon become hot enough to burn. The Nile stretched before him, a serpentine god flowing through the desert. Without it, there would be nothing but sand and death. With it came the blessing of fertile black soil, Kemet, as they called it, the black land that gave their kingdom. Its name, but the river was as cruel as it was kind, bringing flood and bounty in equal measure. Kenty waded into the waters without hesitation. The same river that provided life also carried disease and danger. Crocodiles lurked in the reeds, waiting for the unwary. Parasites invisible to the eye could burrow into the skin, bringing slow, wasting illness. Yet what choice did he have? This was his morning ritual, to cleanse himself in waters shared by all for all purposes. He used the river sand to scrub his skin, lacking the scented oils and natron salts that nobles used. The abrasive grains left his skin raw, but clean, or as clean as one could be when the water itself was used by thousands for washing, waste, and drinking. As he scrubbed, a shadow fell across the water. Looking up, Kenty saw the unmistakable silhouette of a royal barge gliding upriver, its gilded prow catching the early morning sunlight. Atop the vessel stood figures draped in fine linen, so sheer it seemed to float around them like mist. Their bodies glistened with oils, their eyes lined with kohl, their necks and wrists heavy with gold and lapis lazuli. Among them stood a woman, whose very posture commanded attention. Her head was held high beneath an elaborate headdress, her slender arms adorned with bands of gold. Even from a distance, there was no mistaking her identity. Lady Nefret, wife of the governor and rumored confidant of the pharaoh himself. Their eyes met across the water, hers, rimmed with kohl and filled with cool assessment, his, squinting against the sun and widening in sudden recognition. For a heartbeat, the vast chasm between their worlds seemed to narrow. Then her gaze passed over him as if he were merely another reed in the river, another unremarkable feature of the landscape that existed solely as a backdrop to her journey. But in that brief moment of connection, something shifted in Kentis' world. A question formed in his mind, dangerous as a scorpion's sting. Why should the gods decree such vast differences between those born of the same Nile mud? As the barge continued its stately progress upriver, Kente remained waist-deep in the water, suddenly aware that his life was about to change, though whether the gods would smile upon this change or punish him for his audacity remained to be seen. What he could not know was that, on that same luxurious barge, Lady Neferet had indeed noticed him, and in her world of calculated politics and dangerous secrets, she had just found what she had been seeking, a man with nothing to lose. Chapter 2. Bread and Civilization. The walk back from the Nile was always the hardest part of Kentis' morning leaving. The relative relief of the water for the intensifying heat of the day. His stomach growled with familiar emptiness as he approached the communal baking area where women were shaping the day's bread. The wheat they used was emmer, coarsely ground between stones. Inevitably, tiny particles of sand found their way into the flour, making every bite a potential assault on one's teeth. Over time, this would wear down even the strongest molars, leaving many elders able to consume only beer and softened bread soaked in water. Kenti, a voice called out, interrupting his thoughts. It was Torit, a widow who lived 3 huts from his own. Her face, prematurely lined from years under the sun, still managed to convey warmth when she smiled. I saved you some bread from yesterday, not to stale. She pressed the flat, dense loaf into his hands. It was a generous gesture that Kenti knew must have cost her food was never abundant enough to share without consequence. The gods will remember your kindness, he said, the traditional response to such gifts. But privately he wondered if the gods remembered anything at all about the lives of people like them. Torit lowered her voice. There is talk in the village. The governor's men were here before dawn, counting heads for new laborers. They say the pharaoh commands a new temple be built before the next inundation. Kentis' heart sank. Conscription for royal building projects was essentially a death sentence for many. Workers died by the hundreds under the merciless sun, crushed by massive stones, or simply worked until their bodies gave out. Few returned to their villages once taken. How many do they need? He asked, already dreading the answer. 20 strong men from our village alone, Torit replied, her eyes darting nervously to ensure they were not overheard. They return tomorrow to make their selections. Kenti nodded, breaking off a piece of the bread. Each bite required careful chewing, a cautious navigation around the grit that could crack a tooth. The beer served alongside was thick and nutritious, more like a meal than a drink. It was cloudy and sour, containing bits of partially fermented grain, but it provided essential nutrients and, more importantly, was safer than water drawn directly from the Nile. As he ate, children gathered around a village elder who had begun to recount tales of the gods. This was education in their world, oral traditions passed down, practical skills learnt through observation and imitation. Only scribes and priests were formally taught to read and write the sacred hieroglyphs, a knowledge so powerful it was believed to bridge the gap between mortals and gods. And so Set, consumed by jealousy, tricked his brother Osiris into lying in a beautiful chest, the elder intoned, his voice carrying the weight of thousands of years of tradition. Once Osiris was inside, Set sealed the chest and cast it into the Nile, thus murdering the king. The children listened, wide. These were not merely stories, but the foundation of their understanding of the world. Explanations for the flooding of the Nile, the cycle of death and rebirth, the very structure of their society, Kenty listened to, though he had heard these tales countless times. Today, however, something felt different. The morning's encounter with Lady Nefrit had unsettled something within him, making him question certainties he had never before examined. Why did the tales always justify the order of things? Why did the gods always favor those already in power? Why did Kenty? The voice was unfamiliar, authoritative. Kenty turned to find himself facing two men he had never seen before. Their linen kilts were finer than anything in the village, and they carried the short staffs that marked them as officials of some kind. "How do you know my name?" he asked, rising slowly. The taller of the two men smiled thinly. "We make it our business to know many things. You are summoned to the governor's residence immediately." A murmur ran through the villagers who had stopped to watch the exchange. To be summoned by the governor could mean anything: punishment for some unknown transgression, conscription for a dangerous task, or, most unlikely of all, some extraordinary opportunity. "What is this about?" Kenty asked, aware that his question itself might be seen as insubordination. "That is not for us to say," replied the second official. "But delay would be unwise." Torret stepped forward, her face tight with worry. "He has done nothing wrong," she protested, but fell silent when Kenty gave her a warning glance. "I will come," he said, handing back the remainder of his bread to Torret. "May it feed your strength," he added quietly. As he followed the officials through the village, Kenty felt every eye upon him. He had never set foot in the governor's residence, had only glimpsed its whitewashed walls and painted columns from a distance. Now, apparently, he was expected there. The question was, why? What he could not know was that Lady Nefrit had indeed recognized something in him that morning, something that suited her purposes perfectly. And in the world of ancient Egypt, to catch the attention of the powerful was to place one's fate entirely in their hands. Chapter 3: The Governor's House. The walk to the governor's residence felt longer than the journey to the western horizon. With each step, Kenty became increasingly aware of the vast gulf separating his world from that of Lady Nefrit and her husband, Governor Amenhotep. The two officials led him through streets that grew progressively wider and cleaner. The simple, mud-brick dwellings of his village gave way to larger homes with courtyards, then to imposing structures with painted walls and columns. Here, even the air seemed different, perfumed with incense and less thick with the dust that permeated every corner of Kentis' existence. They passed a garden where water, precious, life-giving water, was being used not for crops or drinking, but to maintain ornamental pools and lush plants that served no purpose beyond beauty. The sheer waste of it made Kentis' throat constrict, with a mixture of awe and resentment. Finally, they arrived at the governor's compound, surrounded by a high wall of whitewashed mud brick. Guards flanked the entrance, their faces impassive beneath the shade of a linen awning. Another luxury, protection from the sun that farmers like Kenty could never afford while working the fields. Inside, the contrast with Kentis' daily reality was even more striking. The courtyard was paved with smooth stones, cool beneath his calloused feet. Servants moved with purpose, carrying everything from scrolls of papyrus to jugs of wine and platters of food. None showed signs of the grinding hunger that was Kentis' constant companion. The officials led him to a side chamber where he was instructed to wash more thoroughly. A servant appeared with natron salts and oil teams Kenty had heard of, but never used. The sensation of the oil on his skin after scrubbing was so foreign he almost gasped. For the first time in his memory, his skin did not feel tight and burning from the sun. "Put these on," ordered one of the officials, gesturing to a clean linen shenty that had been laid out. The fabric was so fine it seemed to float rather than fall. "You cannot appear before the governor in your current state." Kenty changed quickly, uncomfortable with this sudden transformation. The new garment felt almost scandalously smooth against his skin. "Remember to speak only when spoken to," the official instructed as they prepared to continue. "Keep your eyes lowered unless commanded to look up. Address the governor as Great One and his wife as Gracious Lady. Do not turn your back to either of them." Kenty nodded, his mouth dry with apprehension. What could possibly be required of him that necessitated such preparations? They led him through a series of increasingly elaborate rooms. The walls were painted with scenes of the governor hunting in the marshes, making offerings to the gods, and receiving tribute from foreign lands. The images told a clear story of power, divine favor, and abundance, everything Kenta's life lacked. Finally, they entered a spacious chamber open to the sky in its center, but shaded around the edges by a roof supported on painted columns. A pool of water reflected the blue of the sky above. The governor sat on an ebony chair inlaid with ivory, dressed in pleated linen so fine it was nearly transparent, adorned with a broad collar of gold and semi-precious stones. Beside him, on a slightly smaller chair, sat Lady Neferet. In the confines of this private space, she had removed her headdress, revealing hair cut in a fashionable bob, glossy with oil. Her eyes, heavily lined with kohl, fixed on Kenty with an intensity that made him acutely aware of the impropriety of meeting her gaze directly. As instructed, he bowed low, eyes fixed on the intricate patterns of the floor. "So this is the man you noticed, my dear." The governor's voice was cultured, each word precisely formed in a way that spoke of years of education. "Yes, husband," Lady Neferet replied. Her voice was lower than Kenty had expected, with a musicality that seemed calculated to please the ear. "He has the right appearance, does he not?" "Look at me, farmer," the governor commanded. Kenty raised his eyes, careful to keep his expression neutral despite his confusion and fear. Governor Amenhat studied him with cool appraisal. "Yes, I see what you mean. The resemblance is remarkable with the right clothing and some instruction. He could indeed serve our purpose." "What purpose, Great One?" The question escaped Kenty's lips before he could stop himself, immediately causing him to tense in anticipation of punishment for such forwardness. But instead of anger, the governor's face showed something like amusement. "He speaks without permission, yet his voice has a certain natural authority. That, too, could be useful." Lady Neferet rose from her chair and approached Kenty. She circled him slowly, examining him as one might inspect a horse or a piece of furniture. "Tell me, farmer," she said, "can you read or write?" "No, gracious lady," Kenty replied, keeping his voice steady despite the strangeness of the situation. "Have you ever traveled beyond your village?" "Only as far as Thebes for the festival of Opit, gracious lady. Once, when I was a boy." She nodded, as if confirming something to herself. "And your family?" "I have none living, gracious lady." This was not entirely true. He had distant cousins, but no one who would notice or care if he disappeared. A smile curved her painted lips. "Perfect," she murmured, before turning back to her husband. "He is ideal for our needs." The governor nodded. "Very well. Explain to him. But, remember, he refuses, or if he betrays us, his fate will be most unpleasant. Lady Neferet turned again to Kenty, her expression now serious. Farmer, you stand at a crossroads. The path you choose now will determine whether you live or die, whether you remain in poverty or taste luxury beyond your imagining. Kenty swallowed hard, feeling suddenly light-headed. What would you have me do, gracious lady? Her answer sent a chill through him, despite the warm air. You are going to become someone else entirely. For a short time, you are going to become a nobleman from a distant province, and, in doing so, you will help us prevent a war that could destroy everything you know. Chapter 4. A Dangerous Proposition. The chamber fell silent after Lady Neferet's declaration. Kenty stood frozen, certain he had misunderstood. Become a nobleman. Him, a farmer who had never held anything more valuable than a copper tool. I do not understand, gracious lady, he finally managed to say. The governor leaned forward in his chair. Let me be plain, farmer. The pharaoh's court is a nest of vipers, those closest to the living Horus scheme constantly for position and favor. One such schemer is Panikamwe, overseer of the granaries and cousin to the pharaoh's chief wife. Kenty remained silent, his mind struggling to comprehend why such high matters of state could possibly involve him. Lady Neferet continued the explanation, her voice low and measured. Panikamwe seeks to discredit my husband by suggesting that the southern provinces under his governance are restless, perhaps even rebellious. He has planted rumors that a notable nobleman from Elephantine is traveling north with grievances against the governor. But there is no such nobleman, added Amenhat. It is a fabrication designed to create suspicion and undermine my position at court. However, Lady Neferet said, stepping closer to Kenty, if this nobleman were to arrive and publicly proclaim his loyalty to both the governor and pharaoh, Panikamwe's plot would collapse. Kenty's eyes widened as understanding dawned. And I am to be this ... fictional nobleman. The governor's smile was cold. You learn quickly for a farmer. Yes, for 1 month, you will become Lord Senemet of Elephantine. You will be groomed, trained, dressed, and presented at court as a loyal subject whose appearance disproves the rumors of southern discontent. But I know nothing of court manners or how to speak as a nobleman would, Kenty protested. I would be discovered immediately. That, said Lady Neferet, is why we have a full cycle of the moon to prepare you. You will be taught everything you need to know how to speak, how to eat, how to address those of different ranks, even how to write your supposed name should it be required. The governor rose from his chair and approached Kenty, his height and bearing imposing despite his slender frame. Make no mistake, farmer, this is not a request. You have been chosen because of your resemblance to the real Lord Senemet, who died 2 seasons ago while hunting a fact known to very few outside his immediate household, who have been well compensated for their silence. The resemblance is truly remarkable, Lady Neferet added. I noticed it immediately, this morning at the river. With the right clothing and manner, no one who has only heard descriptions of Senemet would question your identity. Kenty's mind raced. And if I agree to this deception, what becomes of me afterward? The governor and his wife exchanged a glance before Amenhat answered. Succeed, and you will be rewarded with wealth sufficient to establish yourself as a merchant, perhaps even a small estate, if your performance is convincing enough. And if I fail, Lady Neferet's smile did not reach her eyes, then you will die, likely executed as a spy or impostor. But understand, this refusal is not an option either. You know too much already. The implicit threat hung in the air between them. Kenty understood his position with perfect clarity. Cooperate or be eliminated as a liability. "Do we have your agreement, farmer?" the governor asked, though it was clearly a formality rather than a genuine question. What choice did he have? Return to a life of back-breaking labor and slow starvation, only to be conscripted for temple building and worked to death? Or accept this dangerous gamble that offered at least the possibility of a better future? "I will do as you ask, Great One," Kenty replied, bowing his head. "I will become Lord Senimut." "Excellent," said the governor, returning to his seat. "Your training begins immediately. From this moment, you are no longer Kenty the farmer. That man has ceased to exist." Lady Neferet clapped her hands, and servants appeared instantly. "Take him to the guest quarters in the East Wing. Assign Ippy to begin his instruction in deportment. Summon the scribe Miriamen to teach him the basics of writing his new name, and send for Rennie to measure him for appropriate garments." As the servants led him away, Kenty no Senimut now caught a final exchange between the governor and his wife. "Do you think he can truly pass as nobility?" Amenhart asked. "Raw clay takes whatever shape the potter desires," Lady Neferet replied, "and I am a very skilled potter." The coming days would reveal just how malleable Kenty truly was, and whether he would emerge from this dangerous deception alive. Chapter 5. The Art of Deception. The east wing of the governor's residence was a world unto itself. Kenty's new chamber was larger than the entire hut where he had lived his whole life. The bed, an actual bed raised off the floor, not a simple pallet, was draped with linen finer than any he had ever touched. The walls were painted with scenes of lush gardens and flowing waters, creating the illusion of coolness even as the midday heat pressed against the exterior of the building. But there was no time to marvel at these luxuries. Within moments of his arrival, the transformation began. First came the bather, proper bath, in a copper tub, not a quick dip in the Nile. Servants scrubbed him with natron and applied scented oils that made his skin feel alien to him. His calloused feet received special attention, pumised until the hardened skin was somewhat softened. His nails were cleaned and trimmed. His hair, always roughly cut, was shaved completely, and a wig was fitted to his head, the mark of a nobleman. "You must never remove this in public," instructed Ippy, a slender, austere man who carried himself with such rigid correctness that Kenty wondered if he had a rod for a spine. "A nobleman keeps his head covered at all times outside his private chambers." The wig was heavy and immediately made Kenty's scalp itch, but he dared not complain. This was merely the first of countless adjustments he would need to make. Next came clothing. Gone was the simple shanty of his farming days. Instead, he was dressed in pleated linen so fine it seemed to float around his body. The sensation was disconcerting. He felt almost naked despite being covered. "No, no, 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 no," exclaimed as Kenty struggled with the unfamiliar garments. "A nobleman does not hunch. Stand straight. Imagine a thread pulling you upward from the crown of your head." Kenty attempted to correct his posture, feeling foolish and uncomfortable. "Better," Ippy conceded, though his expression suggested better was still far from acceptable. The lessons continued relentlessly through the day. How to walk with measured steps, never hurrying. How to sit gracefully without collapsing into the chair as if exhausted. How to eat taking small bites, using 3 fingers only, never showing hunger regardless of appetite. By sunset, Kentis's head was spinning with instructions and corrections. His body ached from holding unaccustomed positions. His mind strained to remember countless rules of etiquette that seemed arbitrary and excessive. As the evening meal was served in his chamber, a dizzying array of foods he had only heard of but never tasted, the scribe Miriaman arrived for his first lesson in literacy. "You need not learn everything," the scribe explained, unrolling a sheet of papyrus, "just enough to recognize and write your new name, and perhaps a few key phrases that might be expected of a nobleman." The complexity of hieroglyphic writing overwhelmed Kenti instantly. Each symbol was a work of art, requiring precise strokes and proportions. His farmer's hands, accustomed to crude tools and rough work, struggled to manage the delicate reed. "Pen, think of it as drawing, not writing," Miriaman suggested, guiding Kenta's hand. "See, the owl for the M sound, the water ripple for N, the bread loaf for T, Senenmut." Hours passed as Kenti practiced forming the symbols that would identify him as Lord Senenmut of Elephant. By the time Miriaman left, promising to return the next day, Kenta's fingers were stained with ink and cramped from the unfamiliar precision work. Alone at last, he sank onto the bed, too exhausted even to appreciate its comfort. His mind raced with the day's lessons, trying to absorb everything he had been taught, while also questioning the madness of this entire scheme. How could he, a simple farmer, possibly convince anyone he was nobility? The differences went beyond clothing and mannerisms. They were embedded in every aspect of being, from speech patterns to worldview. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Hurriedly he sat up, trying to recall the proper way to receive a visitor. "Enter," he called, attempting to infuse his voice with the confidence of command. The door opened to reveal Lady Neferet. She was dressed more simply than earlier, her jewelry reduced to a single gold bracelet on each wrist, her face free of the heavy kohl that had ringed her eyes. Without the formal trappings of her position, she appeared younger, though no less intimidating. Kenti rose quickly, too quickly, he realized, as Ippy had instructed him to move with deliberate grace. But Lady Neferet did not seem to notice. "This lapse. Be seated," she said, closing the door behind her. "We must speak privately." Kenti obeyed, watching warily as she took a chair opposite him. Her presence in his chamber, unchaperoned, would have been scandalous under normal circumstances, but nothing about his current situation could be considered normal. "How are your lessons progressing?" she asked, studying him with that same penetrating gaze he had noticed at the river. "They are challenging, gracious lady," he replied honestly. A small smile curved her lips. "The truth suits you better than excessive flattery or false confidence. Remember that." Her directness surprised him. "I will, gracious lady. When we are alone, you may address me simply as Lady Neferet. Too much formality inhibits candor, and I need you to be candid with me now." She leaned forward slightly. "Do you understand what is truly at stake in this deception?" Kenti hesitated before answering. The governor spoke of court politics and rumors that threaten his position. "Yes, but that is merely the surface of deeper waters." Her voice lowered, though they were alone in the room. "What my husband did not tell you is that Panikamwe's schemes extend beyond court gossip. We have evidence he is diverting grain from royal storehouses and blaming shortfalls on supposed unrest in our province. Diverting grain. For what purpose? To create artificial scarcity, driving up prices and enriching himself, while also undermining my husband's administration. But more dangerously, to starve certain regions into actual rebellion. which would then prove his accusations correct. Kenty felt a chill despite the warm evening. Grain was life itself in Egypt. Control of its distribution was power in its purest form. How does my impersonating this nobleman help counter such a plot? Lady Nefret's eyes gleamed with something like approval at his question. Because Lord Senamit was known to have extensive farmlands and intimate knowledge of agricultural yields in the southern provinces. Your appearance at court, offering accurate harvest figures that contradict Panikamwe's claims, will not only disprove rumors of unrest, but also expose his lies about grain production. But I know nothing of harvest figures beyond my own. Small plot, Kenty protested. You will be provided with the necessary information, she assured him. You need only present it convincingly. She rose and moved to the window, looking out at the garden below, now silvered by moonlight. There is another reason I selected you specifically, Kenty. The use of his real name startled him. What reason, my lady? I saw something. In your eyes this morning at the river, a question, perhaps even a resentment. You looked to me not just as a superior, but as someone whose privilege you questioned. She turned to face him again. That awareness, that capacity for critical thought is rare among those who have never been taught to question their place. Kenty said nothing, afraid that admitting to such thoughts might still be dangerous. You need not confirm or deny it, she continued. But know this, such perception will serve you well in the den of serpents, that is, the royal court. The nobles you will encounter were born to privilege and take it as their divine right. They do not question the order of things because that order favors them absolutely. She moved closer, her gaze intense. But you see the arbitrary nature of it all, do you not? How the accident of birth determines whether one commands or obeys, feasts or starves. Kenty swallowed hard. Such thoughts are dangerous. My lady, yes, they are. But they are also powerful. Use that understanding. Watch how the nobles behave, knowing that their confidence comes not from superior worth, but from unearned advantage. She placed her hand briefly on his shoulder, gesture so unexpected that Kenty nearly flinched. Rest now. Tomorrow, your lessons continue, and they will be even more demanding. At the door, she paused. One last thing. Trust no one completely in this endeavor, not my husband, not your instructors, not even me. With that cryptic warning, she was gone, leaving Kenty alone with more questions than answers and the growing certainty that he had stepped into a game, far more dangerous than he had initially understood. Chapter 6. Unveiling the Court. Days after Kenty first entered the governor's residence, a grand procession departed for the royal city of Thebes. At its center, carried in a curtained litter that shielded him from both the sun and public scrutiny, was Lord Senamit of Elephantine, a man unrecognizable as the farmer who had once bathed in the Nile. The transformation was remarkable, even to Kenty himself. His once sun-roughened skin had been protected from further damage and treated with oils, until it took on a smoothness appropriate to his supposed station. His hands, though still bearing some calluses that could not be entirely eliminated, were now adorned with rings that drew attention away from such telling imperfections. His body, always lean from labor and inadequate food, had filled out slightly from the rich diet of the past month, giving him a healthier appearance, more fitting for nobility. But the physical changes were only the foundation. The true metamorphosis was in how he carried himself, how he spoke, how he observed the world around him. Ippy had drilled him relentlessly on proper bearing and speech patterns. Miriamun had taught him to recognize important hieroglyphs and to write his supposed name with reasonable confidence. The governor himself had instructed him on the landscape of the court, the key players, their relationships and rivalries. And through it all, Lady Neferet had been a constant, enigmatic presence, sometimes a harsh critic, sometimes a patient teacher, always an inscrutable force driving the deception forward. Now, as the procession made its way along the road to Thebes, Kenty attempted to calm his racing heart by reviewing the story they had crafted for him. Lord Senemort, a wealthy landowner from Elephantine, had spent the past 3 years inspecting his remote properties along the southern border. Now he was traveling to Thebes to pay homage to the pharaoh and to report on the excellent harvests and peaceful conditions in the southernmost provinces. He was a widower with no children, explaining why he traveled alone except for a small retinue of servants, all, actually, the governor's people, carefully selected and instructed to maintain the deception. It was a simple narrative, designed to be easily remembered and difficult to disprove. Yet its very simplicity made Kenty nervous. Surely real lives were more complicated, with more connections and contradictions. The curtain of his litter parted, and Lady Neferet slipped inside. She had joined the procession ostensibly as a representative of her husband, who had remained behind to attend to provincial matters. In reality, she was there to guide Kenty through the treacherous waters of court politics. "We approach the city," she informed him. "Are you prepared?" Kenty nodded, not entirely truthfully. Could anyone truly be prepared for such a deception? "Remember, this first day is merely to establish your presence," she continued. "You will be presented at court, acknowledged by the pharaoh, and then withdrawn to rest from your long journey. The real test comes tomorrow at the banquet, and Panicum Way. Will he be present today?" "Almost certainly. He will want to assess this unexpected development personally." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "He is dangerous, Kenty. Never forget that. Behind his obsequious manner lies a mind like a cobra patient, calculating and lethal when it strikes." Kenty absorbed this warning, adding it to the mental map he had been constructing of the court and its players. "One last instruction," Lady Neferet said, her voice lower now. "If at any point you feel the deception is about to be exposed, you must give me the signal we discussed. I will create a distraction to allow you to withdraw temporarily." Kenty nodded, his fingers unconsciously touching the amulet at his throat. The agreed-upon signal would be to adjust it 3 times in quick succession. The curtain fell back into place as Lady Neferet departed, leaving Kenty alone with his thoughts as the sounds of the city grew louder around them. The procession was now passing through Thebes itself, the greatest city in the known world. Though he could not see through the curtains, Kenty could hear the cacophony of urban life merchants hawking their wares. Children playing, animals braying, and the constant undercurrent of thousands of lives intersecting in the narrow streets. Finally, the litter came to a stop. When the curtain was drawn back, Kenty found himself in a vast courtyard of polished limestone. Before him rose a colonnade of massive pillars painted in vivid colors and topped with capitals carved to resemble papyrus blooms. Beyond lay the royal palace itself, its scale designed to humble all who approached. Lord Senemort announced, the herald who had traveled with them, "Welcome to the house of Pharaoh." Taking a deep breath, Kenty stepped from the litter, carefully maintaining the dignified bearing Ippy had drilled into him over countless hours. His fine linen robes settled around him, the weight of his beaded collar and pectoral reminded him of his supposed status, and the wig sat heavily upon his head, all physical anchors for the role he must now play. A court official approached, bowing respectfully. "Lord Senemat, I am Uzahat, steward of guests to the royal court. If you will follow me, the Divine One awaits his loyal subjects in the Hall of Appearances." Kenty followed, acutely aware of Lady Neferet walking several paces behind him, as protocol dictated. They passed through a series of increasingly magnificent halls, each more overwhelming than the last. The walls and columns were covered in hieroglyphs and painted scenes, depicting the pharaoh's divine powers mighting enemies, making offerings to gods, receiving tribute from foreign lands. Other nobles and officials moved through these spaces with practiced ease, their faces betraying no awe at their surroundings. Kenty fought to maintain the same appearance of comfortable familiarity, though inside he marveled at the sheer audacity of such opulence. Finally, they arrived at the threshold of the Hall of Appearances. Two massive cedar doors, inlaid with gold and electrum, stood open, revealing a chamber that seemed to glow from within. Guards flanked the entrance, their posture rigid, spears gleaming in the light that streamed through high, clear-story windows. "Announce yourself to the herald," Uzahat instructed quietly. Kenty stepped forward, drawing on every lesson in confidence and authority he had received. "Lord Senemat of Elephantine," he stated, his voice clear and steady despite the fear coursing through him. The herald, a man with a voice that carried like a trumpet, repeated the name to the assembled court within, and then Kenty was walking into the most dangerous performance of his life, into the direct presence of the living Horus, the Lord of the Two Lands, Pharaoh Thutmose himself. Chapter 7. The Lion's Den. The Hall of Appearances was designed to overwhelm. Kenty had been prepared for this by both Ippy and Lady Neferet, but no description could capture the reality of standing in that space. Massive columns rose to a ceiling, painted with stars on a deep blue background, creating the impression that the night sky itself rested atop the stone forest. Light entered through clear-story windows, casting beams that seemed almost solid in the incense-heavy air, and at the far end, elevated on a dais of polished black granite, sat Pharaoh Thutmose upon his throne of gold and ivory. Kenty moved forward as he had been instructed, his eyes appropriately lowered, stopping at the prescribed distance from the throne. There he prostrated himself, pressing his forehead to the cool stone floor. "Rise, Lord Senemat," came a voice from the daisnot, the pharaoh himself, but a court official speaking on his behalf, for the living Horus rarely addressed common nobles directly. As Kenty rose, he allowed himself a careful glance at the figure on the throne. Thutmose was younger than he had expected, perhaps no more than 30, with the athletic build of a warrior king. He wore the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, the false beard of kingship, and enough gold to feed an entire village for years. His expression was inscrutable, his kohl-rimmed eyes revealing nothing of the man behind the divine office. Standing to the right of the throne was a figure whose identity Kenty did not need to question. Panicamway, overseer of the granaries, was exactly as Lady Neferet had described him, a tall, slender man with narrow shoulders and a face whose handsome features were arranged in a mask of perpetual deference. Only his eyes betrayed a different nature, darting constantly, observing, calculating. Those sharp eyes now fixed on Kenty with undisguised interest. "Lord Senemat of Elephantine," announced the court official, "you have been away from the Two Lands for some time. What brings you before Divine Pharaoh?" This was the moment. Kenty had rehearsed countless times. He bowed again, less deeply than before. "Great One, I return from inspecting my southern estates to bring joyous news. The harvests have been exceptional, the people content, and the borders secure. I come to pay homage to divine Pharaoh and to assure him that the southernmost provinces flourish under his blessed rule. A murmur ran through the assembled courtiers. Kenti did not need to look at Panagamwe to know that this public declaration directly contradicted the rumors he had been spreading. "This is welcome news," the court official responded, "especially as there have been concerns regarding the southern provinces." Concerns. Kenti allowed just the right note of surprise to enter his voice. "I have traveled extensively through the region and found nothing but prosperity and loyalty. If there are specific matters that trouble the court, I would be honored to address them." Now Panagamwe stepped forward, his movement so smooth it seemed he glided rather than walked. "Forgive me, Divine One," he said, addressing the Pharaoh directly, "but perhaps we should question the source of such extraordinarily positive reports." The Pharaoh made a small gesture that apparently granted permission for Panagamwe to continue. "It seems strange," Panagamwe said, turning to face Kenti, "that a single nobleman could have such comprehensive knowledge of the entire southern region. And stranger still that his observations so dramatically contradict reports from other sources." Kenti felt sweat forming beneath his wig, but kept his expression neutral. "Not strange at all, when one considers that my family has held lands from Elephantine to the southern border for 7 generations. Our stewards report to me monthly on conditions throughout the region." He reached into the pouch at his waist and withdrew a small roll of papyrus prepared by Miriamin and filled with accurate harvest figures from the governor's own records. "I have brought documentation of the yields from the major agricultural centers. Perhaps a comparison with official records would illuminate the truth of the matter." This was a calculated risk. If Panagamwe had indeed been falsifying records, a direct comparison would expose the discrepancy. By offering the documents publicly, Kenti was forcing the issue into the open. Panagamwe's expression did not change, but Kenti noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. "An interesting suggestion," Panagamwe replied smoothly, "though I wonder when did Lord Senemat become so concerned with administrative details? As I recall, your interests lay more in hunting and pleasure than in grain tallies." The trap was subtle but dangerous. Panagamwe was testing him, referring to a supposed aspect of the real Senemat's character that Kenti might not know. Fortunately, the governor and Lady Neferet had anticipated such probes. Kenti gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "Age brings wisdom, Overseer Panagamwe. Even the most dedicated hunter eventually realizes that without proper management of his estates, there will be neither game to hunt nor wine to enjoy afterward." A ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the court. Even the Pharaoh's stern expression seemed to soften slightly. Panagamwe inclined his head, acknowledging the response without conceding the point. "Indeed, perhaps we shall have opportunity to discuss such matters further at tomorrow's banquet. I am certain many at court would be interested in your observations." "I look forward to it," Kenti replied, recognizing both the implied threat and the temporary reprieve. The real confrontation had been postponed, not avoided. The audience continued with other nobles presenting themselves, reporting on various matters of state. Kenti was directed to stand among the lesser nobility at the side of the hall, where he maintained his dignified posture despite the growing ache in his back and legs. Court etiquette demanded absolute stillness in the Pharaoh's presence. No shifting of weight, no scratching of itches, no expressions of discomfort. From his position, he could observe Lady Neferet, who stood among the women of rank on the opposite side of the hall. Her face revealed nothing, but when their eyes briefly met, he detected the slightest nod of approval. Hours later, when the pharaoh finally rose and departed through a door behind the throne, the tension in the hall dissipated instantly. Voices rose in conversation, bodies relaxed from their rigid formality, and the assembled nobility began to disperse. Kenty found himself approached by several curious nobles, each offering polite greetings while clearly fishing for information about the mysterious Lord Senemet, who had been absent from court for so long. He navigated these encounters as he had been taught, offering pleasantries without substance, asking questions rather than answering them, and generally revealing nothing of consequence. As the hall emptied, Lady Nefret approached, accompanied by Uzahat, the steward. "Lord Senemet," Uzahat said, "chambers have been prepared for you in the eastern wing of the palace. If you will follow me." Kenty nodded graciously, falling into step beside Lady Nefret as they followed the steward through the labyrinthine palace. "You performed well," she murmured, her voice too low to be overheard. "But Panikamwe is suspicious. He will be preparing a more thorough test for tomorrow." He seemed to know the real Senemort personally. Kenty replied quietly, "That complicates matters. It was always a possibility. Remember what I taught you when uncertain. Deflect with a question or change the subject to something you do know." They arrived at a set of ornate doors guarded by two expressionless soldiers. Uzahat bowed. "These are your quarters, Lord Senemet. Servants have been assigned to attend to your needs. The banquet begins at sunset tomorrow in the Hall of Feasts." As soon as they were alone in the spacious chamber beyond, Kenty released a long, shuddering breath. The room was even more luxurious than his quarters in the governor's residence, the bed larger, the furnishings more ornate, the wall paintings more detailed. A balcony overlooked an inner garden where fountains played among flowering plants and carefully pruned trees. "I survived the first encounter," he said, removing the heavy wig with relief. Lady Nefret's expression remained serious. "Yes, but tomorrow will be far more dangerous. The formal audience today was protected by strict protocol. The banquet will allow for direct conversation, probing questions, and social traps." She moved to the balcony, ensuring they could not be overheard. "There is something else you should know. I have received word that Panikamwe has sent messengers southward, likely seeking someone who knew the real Senemet well enough to expose you." Kenty felt cold despite the warm evening air. "How much time do we have?" "A week at most. We must discredit him before his messengers return." She placed a hand briefly on his arm, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a month ago, but now seemed natural between them. "Rest now. Tomorrow we move against him directly." After she left, Kenty stood on the balcony, watching the palace gardens fade into twilight. Below, servants lit oil lamps along the paths, creating pools of golden light in the gathering darkness. Beyond the palace walls lay the sprawling city of Thebes, and beyond that, the familiar world of fields and villages where he had once belonged. That life now seemed as distant and unreal as the stars appearing overhead. Who was he, now still Kenty, the farmer beneath the trappings of nobility, or becoming someone new altogether? More troubling still was the question of what would happen when this dangerous game reached its conclusion. If they succeeded in discrediting Panikamwe, would the governor and Lady Nefret honor their promise of wealth and freedom? Or would Kenty become a dangerous loose end to be quietly eliminated? He had no answers, only the certainty that there was no path back to his former life. The only way was forward, deeper into the deadly intrigues of the royal court. Chapter 8. The Banquet of Secrets. The hall of feasts blazed with the light of 100 oil lamps. Low tables arranged in a horseshoe pattern filled the vast chamber, each piled with dishes that displayed the empire's wealth, and rich-roasted waterfowl stuffed with herbs, fish from the Nile prepared in a dozen different ways, bread of the finest wheat, figs and dates glazed with honey, wine from the royal vineyards, and imported delicacies from lands beyond Egypt's borders. The nobles reclined on cushioned benches, attended by servants who kept cups filled and plates replenished. Musicians played quietly in one corner, providing a pleasant backdrop to the hum of conversation. The air was heavy with the scents of food, incense, and perfumed oils. Kenty Lord Senemet, as he now thought of himself, most of the time had been placed at a position of moderate honor, neither too close to the pharaoh's table at the center, nor relegated to the outer edges where the least significant guests were seated. Lady Neferet was some distance away, as protocol demanded separation of men and women at such gatherings. To Kentis' left sat Minkart, a chatty nobleman who oversaw tax collection in the eastern districts. To his right was Senbi, an older military commander whose scarred face and calloused hands spoke of campaigns against Nubian raiders in his younger days. So, Senemet Minkot was saying, his speech already slightly slurred from wine though. The banquet had barely begun. Is it true what they say about the women of Elephantine, that their beauty rivals even that of the royal concubines? Kenty smiled diplomatically. The women of all Egypt are flowers in the garden of the two lands. It would be presumptuous of me to compare them. Senbi gave a short bark of laughter. Well answered. Though I remember you being less diplomatic in your youth, Senemet. That tongue of yours nearly got you flogged at least twice during the campaign against the Cushites. This was dangerous territory. Kenty had been briefed on Senemet's military service, but not on specific incidents during campaigns. He took a sip of wine, buying a moment to think. Age has its benefits, including the wisdom to guard one's tongue, he replied carefully, though perhaps not the wisdom to moderate one's drinking. This wine is exceptional. The deflection worked. Senbi launched into a comparison of wines from various regions, a topic Kenty could navigate safely thanks to Lady Neferet's thorough lessons on such social niceties. As the evening progressed, Kenty maintained his guard, parrying personal questions with generalities or turning the conversation to safer topics. He was just beginning to relax slightly when a shadow fell across the table. "Lord Senemet," said a now familiar voice, "I trust you are enjoying the pharaoh's hospitality." Panikamwe stood there, elegant in robes of the finest linen, adorned with gold pectorals and wrist cuffs that caught the lamplight. Behind him stood a younger man Kenty had not seen before, whose resemblance to Panikamwe marked him clearly as a relative. "Overseer Panikamwe," Kenty acknowledged, inclining his head respectfully. "Indeed, the Divine One's generosity is unmatched." "May I introduce my nephew, Amenemope," Panikamwe said, gesturing to the young man. "He serves as my assistant in the oversight of the granaries." Kenty nodded to the nephew. "A pleasure. Amenemope has just returned from an inspection." Tour of the southern provinces, Panikamwe continued, his eyes never leaving Kenta's face. "His observations of conditions there differ rather dramatically from your own." The challenge was direct now, no longer veiled in courtly niceties. Kenty felt sweat forming at his temples, but maintained his composed expression. "How curious," he replied. "Perhaps we visited different regions. The south is vast, after all." "Indeed," said Panikamwe smoothly, "which is why I find it odd that you claim comprehensive knowledge of the entire area. Tell me, Lord Senemat, did your travels take you to the region around the Third Cataract? It was a trap, Kenty realized instantly. The Third Cataract of the Nile lay far to the south, in Nubian territory beyond Egypt's control. No Egyptian noble would claim to have estates there. My lands extend to the southern border, overseer, not beyond it, he replied calmly. I would not presume to report on territories outside the pharaoh's dominion. A flicker of disappointment crossed Panikamwe's face. His attempt to catch Kenty in geographical ignorance had failed. Of course, he recovered quickly, though it is still puzzling how your observations so contradict those of my nephew. Amenemope reports failing crops, restless peasants, and rumors of rebellion in precisely the areas you claim are prosperous and peaceful. Kenty took a calculated risk. Perhaps the discrepancy lies not in the actual conditions, but in how they are being reported to the court. After all, some might find advantage in painting a picture of instability. The implication was clear, and Panikamwe's eyes narrowed dangerously. A serious suggestion, Lord Senemat. Some might even call it an accusation. Merely an observation, Kenty replied, though I do wonder what would motivate anyone to fabricate reports of unrest. What advantage could be gained from such deception? Around them, nearby conversations had quieted as others sensed the tension building between the two men. From across the room, Kenty was aware of Lady Nefret watching the exchange intently. One might ask the same of you, Panikfrey countered. What advantage do you gain by claiming all is well when it clearly is not? Perhaps your long absence has left you out of touch with your own lands. Or perhaps your relationship with Governor Omenhart colors your perception. This was the moment to strike. Kenty reached again for the document pouch he had brought with him. My relationship with the governor is that of any loyal subject to Pharaoh's appointed official, he said, withdrawing the papyrus containing the harvest figures. And my reports are based not on perception, but on documented fact. These are the harvest tallies from my estates and the surrounding regions for the past 3 seasons. He unrolled the papyrus on the table. As you can see, yields have increased steadily. The tax collectors can confirm that my payments to the royal treasury reflect these figures. Several nearby nobles leaned forward with interest. Documented. Evidence was difficult to dismiss, especially when it contradicted only unsupported claims. Panikamwe studied the figures briefly, his face unreadable. Impressive numbers, indeed, though papyrus, like men, can be persuaded to tell convenient tales. Are you suggesting that documents are falsified? Kenty asked, allowing a note of outrage to enter his voice. I merely suggest that a more thorough verification is warranted. Panikamwe smiled thinly. In fact, I have already dispatched officials to conduct a proper assessment of the southern provinces. They should return within days, bringing clarity to these ... contradictions. This confirmed Lady Nefret's warning. Time was indeed running short. A wise precaution, Kenty agreed. Though I wonder, will these officials also investigate the management of the royal granaries? There are concerning discrepancies between the amounts collected in tax and those recorded as available for distribution. This was the information Lady Nefret had provided him, financial figures showing the gap between what entered the granaries and what was officially distributed, evidence of Panikamwe's theft. Panikamwe's face hardened. You overstep, Senemat. The administration of the royal granaries is my domain, appointed by divine Pharaoh himself. To question it is to question his divine wisdom in selecting his officials. Not at all, Kenty replied smoothly. I question neither divine Pharaoh nor his wisdom. I merely observe that numbers, like nature, should maintain a certain balance. When they do not, someone must have upset that balance. By now, they had attracted a wider audience. Several high officials had turned their attention to the exchange, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Panicum Wei leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You play a dangerous game, Senamatif. That is truly who you are. I know for a fact that the real Lord Senamat had a distinctive scar on his left shoulder, the result of a hunting accident in his youth. I wonder if you bear the same mark." Kenty felt his blood run cold. This was a detail neither the governor nor Lady Nefrit had mentioned. He was on the verge of reaching for the amulet at his neck, the signal for Lady Nefrit to create a distraction when fate intervened from an unexpected quarter. "A scar like this one, Panicum Wei," came a gruff voice. It was Senbi, the old military commander, who had been listening to the exchange with growing interest. He pulled aside his own robe to reveal a jagged scar on his shoulder. Many of us who served in the Nubian campaigns bear such marks. The Kushite archers were particularly fond of targeting officers. The interruption gave Kenty the moment he needed to recover his composure. "Indeed," he said, inclining his head gratefully to Senbi, "though mine has faded somewhat with the years." Panikamoy's eyes darted between the two men, clearly frustrated by the unexpected intervention. How convenient to find a defender at just the right moment. But there are other tests of identity that cannot be so easily dismissed. "We shall explore them when my messengers return." With that thinly veiled threat, he withdrew, taking his nephew with him. As they moved away, Kenty released a breath he had not realized he was holding. "My thanks, Commander Senbi," he said quietly. The old soldier studied him with shrewd eyes. "I did not do it for you, Senamator, whoever you may be. I did it because I have watched Panicum Wei grow fat while soldiers go unpaid in villages. Hunger, if you are working against him, then you have my support, regardless of your true identity." This unexpected alliance sent Kentis' mind racing with new possibilities. If others at court harbored similar resentments against Panicum Wei, perhaps they could be recruited to help expose his corruption. Before he could pursue this thought, a servant approached with a small pottery tokena signal from Lady Nefrit that they needed to speak privately. The game had entered a new and even more dangerous phase. Chapter 9: Webs of Deception. The garden courtyard was deserted at this late hour, the other guests still enjoying the banquet within. Moonlight silvered the surface of a small pool surrounded by papyrus plants and flowering lotus. Here, sheltered by the rustling reeds and the gentle splash of a fountain, Kenty waited as instructed by the servant who had delivered Lady Nefrit's token. She arrived moments later, moving silently along the garden path, her figure ghostly in the pale light, without the elaborate wig and heavy jewelry she had worn at the banquet. She seemed smaller, more human, less the formidable, noble woman, and more the clever strategist Kenty had come to know. "Panicum Wei is making his move sooner than expected," she said without preamble. "His messengers will return within 3 days, not a week as I had thought." "How do you know this?" Kenty asked. "I have my own sources within his household." A small, proud smile played at the corner of her mouth. One should never underestimate the loyalty that can be purchased from underpaid servants. Kenty nodded, processing this information. He mentioned a scar that the real Senamat supposedly had. "Information you did not provide me, because it was false," Lady Nefrit replied. "A test which you navigated well with Senbus's help. The real Senamat had no such scar." Then Senbi knew, Senbi suspected, perhaps. but he dislikes Panicum Way enough to assist in his downfall regardless of the means. She moved closer, her voice dropping further. But that is not why I summoned you. There has been a significant development. One of my agents intercepted a message from Panicum Way to an associate in Memphis. It appears he is not merely stealing grain, but selling it to Hittite merchants in exchange for silver and weapons. Kentis' eyes widened. That's treason. Precisely. Far more serious than simple corruption. If proven, it would mean not just his removal from office, but his execution. She paused, studying his face in the moonlight. But to prove it, we need access to his private records. Records kept in his personal quarters. Understanding dawned on Kenty. You want me to break into his rooms? Not you specifically. I have others better suited to such tasks. But we need a distraction to ensure Panicum Way is occupied elsewhere while it happens. And I am to provide this distraction. It was not a question. Lady Neferet nodded. Tomorrow at midday, you will request a formal audience with the Pharaoh, claiming to have urgent information regarding the southern provinces. This will draw Panicum Way to the throne room to counter whatever you might say. While he is there, my agents will enter his quarters and find the evidence we need. What happens if they find nothing? Her expression hardened. Then our position becomes extremely precarious. Without proof of his greater crimes, we are left with only your word against his regarding conditions in the south. Once his messengers return and inevitably report that no one recognizes Lord Senemet, your deception will be exposed. The reality of his situation crashed down on Kenty with renewed force. If they failed to discredit Panicum Way before his messengers returned, discovery was inevitable, and discovery meant death, not just for him, but likely for Lady Neferet, and the governor as well. There is another possibility, he said slowly, an idea forming, one that does not rely on finding documents that may not exist or may be too well hidden. Lady Neferet raised an eyebrow, inviting him to continue. Instead of trying to prove what Panicum Way has already done, we could catch him in the act, Kenty suggested. If he is indeed selling grain to Hittite merchants, there must be a means of communication, a way to arrange these transactions. Go on. What if we sent a message, appearing to be from his Hittite contact, requesting an urgent meeting? If he responds or appears at the meeting place, it would be evidence of his treasonous connections. A slow smile spread across Lady Neferet's face. A trap, yes, this has merit. But it would require knowledge of his existing arrangements, who his contacts are, how they communicate, where they meet. Your servant spy might know, or could find out, Kenty pressed. And it seems less risky than hoping to find incriminating documents that he has likely hidden carefully. She considered this for a moment. Both approaches have their merits and their risks. Perhaps we should pursue both simultaneously. You will still provide the distraction tomorrow, while my agents search his quarters. But I will also set in motion your plan to trap him in a compromising meeting. Kenty nodded, relieved that his suggestion had been taken seriously. In the weeks since his transformation had begun, he had changed in ways that went beyond appearance and mannerisms. He was thinking differently now, seeing the layers of motivation and calculation that drove the actions of those around him. There is one more thing we must discuss, Lady Neferet said, her tone growing more serious. What happens if we succeed? The governor promised me wealth and freedom, Kenty reminded her. Yes, he did. But I wonder if you have considered what form that freedom might take. She gestured to his nobleman's attire. You have adapted remarkably to this role, Kenty. You move, speak, and think increasingly like the nobility you impersonate. Could you truly return to a farmer's life after experiencing this world? Would you want to? The question struck at something Kenty had been avoiding confronting. The truth was, he had begun to enjoy aspects of this new existence, not just the material comforts, but the mental challenges, the high-stakes interactions, even the sense of having impact beyond his own small sphere. "What alternative are you suggesting?" he asked cautiously. "If we succeed in removing Panicumway, someone will need to take his place. The position of overseer of the granaries is a powerful one that could be used to actually improve conditions for the common people rather than exploit them." Kenty stared at her in disbelief. "You cannot be suggesting that Odger, farmer with barely a month of education, could fill such a role. Not as Kenty the farmer, no, but as Lord Senamort, with continued guidance and education. Perhaps." Her eyes held his, intense and unblinking. "The real Senamort is dead. His family line ended with him. If you succeeded in establishing yourself in his identity now, you could potentially maintain it indefinitely." The suggestion was so audacious that Kenty could barely process it. The deception would eventually be discovered. Someone who knew him would come forward. Possibly, but the longer you successfully maintain the role, the less likely anyone would be to challenge it. After all, memories fade, people change with time, and those few who might know the truth could be ... managed. Kenty searched her face in the moonlight. "Why would you suggest this? What do you gain from it?" "An ally in a position of power. Someone who remembers what it means to labor under the sun, to go hungry while others feast, to have no voice in the decisions that govern your existence." Her hand touched his arm lightly. "Someone whose loyalty comes not from tradition or self-interest, but from genuine recognition of opportunity given." The proposition was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. To permanently leave behind his identity, to live a lie for the rest of his life, but a lie that might allow him to effect real change from a position of influence. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching voices forced them to separate. Quickly, Lady Nefret slipped away into the shadows of the garden, leaving Kenty alone with the monumentality of the choice before him. As he made his way back to his quarters, passing groups of laughing, intoxicated nobles who gave him respectful nods, Kenty realized that regardless of the outcome of their schemes against Panicumway, he had already crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The simple farmer who had bathed in the Nile was gone, replaced by someone far more complex, more calculating, someone who now walked in two worlds and fully belonged to neither. Chapter 10. The trap is set. The audience chamber was less crowded for the midday gathering than it had been for the formal court, but the atmosphere was no less tense. Kenty stood before the dais where Pharaoh Thutmose sat, flanked by his high officials. As expected, Panicumway was present, his face composed, in its usual mask of deference, though his eyes betrayed wariness. "Lord Senamort," intoned the court announcer, "you have requested this audience to bring information of importance to divine Pharaoh." Kenty bowed deeply. "Great one, I come bearing troubling news that could not wait for the usual channels of communication." The Pharaoh made a small gesture indicating he should continue. Until now, Kenty had interacted with the living Horus only in formal settings with prescribed rituals. This more direct engagement was both an opportunity and a tremendous risk. "Divine One," Kenty began, "in my journeys through the southern provinces, I encountered not only the prosperity I reported earlier, but also disturbing rumors that I felt duty-bound to investigate before bringing them to your divine attention. He paused, aware of Panikenway, shifting slightly beside the throne, tension visible in the set of his shoulders. These rumors spoke of royal grain being diverted from storage facilities and transported north under cover of darkness. At first, I dismissed them as mere gossip, but upon discreet inquiry, I discovered multiple witnesses to these movements, including several who claimed the grain was being loaded onto foreign vessels. A murmur ran through the assembled officials. The implication was clear: someone was selling royal grain to foreign powers, a serious crime that bordered on treason. "This is outrageous," Panikenway interjected, stepping forward. "Divine One, these are baseless accusations without a shred of evidence. Lord Senemet brings vague rumors and hearsay to the sacred audience chamber, wasting your divine attention on matters that should be investigated through proper channels." The Pharaoh's expression remained inscrutable, but he raised a hand for silence. "Evidence is indeed required for such serious claims. Lord Senemort, do you have any to present?" This was the moment where the plan diverged from truth. Kenty had no real evidence. The accusation was meant purely as a distraction, while Lady Nefrit's agents searched Panikenway's quarters. But he had prepared for this question. "Divine One, I have recorded the testimonies of several witnesses," he said, producing another papyrus scroll, this one containing fabricated statements prepared by Lady Nefret. "More significantly, I have mapped the locations and dates of these suspicious grain movements." He unrolled the scroll, revealing a detailed map of the southern provinces with markings indicating routes and locations. It was an impressive document, created with care by Miriaman to appear authentic. "Furthermore," Kenty continued, "I have brought one of these witnesses with me to Thebes, a grain porter named Barki, who worked at the royal storage facilities near Edfu. With your divine permission, he awaits outside to give his testimony directly." This was another fabrication. There was no witness, but it served its purpose. Panikenway's composure slipped momentarily, a flash of alarm crossing his features before he regained control. "Divine One," Panikenway said quickly, "this is highly irregular. Such matters should be investigated by the proper authorities. My office, in fact, as overseer of the granaries, to parade common laborers before Divine Pharaoh based on unsubstantiated claims is an insult to proper procedure." The Pharaoh studied both men silently, his kohl-rimmed eyes revealing nothing of his thoughts. Finally, he spoke directly, rare occurrence that immediately commanded complete attention. "These accusations are indeed serious, concerning as they do the lifeblood of Egypt or grain." His voice was surprisingly soft, yet carried effortlessly through the chamber. "Panikenway, you will form an investigative council to examine Lord Senemet's evidence, include representatives from the Treasury, the military, and the Temple of Ammon. I expect a preliminary report within 3 days." Panikenway bowed deeply. "As Divine Pharaoh commands." "Lord Senemet," the Pharaoh continued, turning his attention to Kenty, "you will provide all your evidence and witnesses to this council. If your accusations prove false or malicious, the consequences will be severe." "I understand, Divine One," Kenty replied, bowing equally low. "I seek only the truth and the protection of Egypt's resources." The audience concluded shortly thereafter. As Kenty left the chamber, he caught Lady Neferet's eye briefly. A slight nod told him that the distraction had worked. Her agents had sufficient time to search Panikenway's quarters. Now they needed only to learn whether anything incriminating had been found, and to set the second part of their plan in motion, the trap to catch Panikenway in direct contact with his Hittite Conspirators? The pieces were moving rapidly now on this dangerous game board. The only question was who would be left standing when all moves had been played. Chapter 11. Closing the net. Nothing. Lady Neferat's voice was tight with frustration as she paced the confined space of the small garden alcove where they had arranged to meet. My agents found nothing incriminating in his quarters. Panicamway is too clever to keep such evidence where it might be discovered. The news was a serious blow. Without concrete proof of Panicamway's crimes, they were left with only accusations and fabricated evidence that would not withstand serious scrutiny. Then we must rely on our second plan, Kenty said. The trap. Have you made arrangements? Lady Neferat nodded, her composure returning. Yes, my servant within Panicamway's household has confirmed that he communicates with his Hittite contact through a merchant named Kemsit, who operates near the docks. We have intercepted Kemsit and persuaded him to cooperate. Persuaded? Kenty raised an eyebrow. He was caught smuggling luxury goods without paying proper taxes, she explained. We offered him a choice between helping us or facing punishment. He chose wisely, and the message to Panicamway delivered. This morning, it appears to come from his Hittite contact, requesting an urgent meeting tonight to discuss a significant shipment. The location is an abandoned storage building near the northern docks, isolated enough for privacy but accessible enough for us to surround it with witnesses. Kente considered this. Panicamway is cautious. He may send an intermediary, rather than appearing himself, possibly. But the message emphasized the need for his personal presence due to the sensitive nature of the transaction, and we have arranged for multiple witnesses, not just my own people, but also several respected temple officials who have their own reasons to distrust Panicamway. If he appears, he will be seen by individuals whose testimony cannot be easily dismissed. The plan was sound, but Kenty felt a growing sense of unease. What if he suspects a trap? He knows we have accused him publicly now. He will be on his guard. That is precisely why the timing of your accusation today was perfect. Lady Neferat replied. It puts him under pressure, but gives him no time to communicate with his actual Hittite contacts to verify the message. He must either respond to the summons or risk losing a valuable connection in a moment of vulnerability. She moved closer, lowering her voice further, and there is another factor at play. My sources indicate that Panicamway is financially overextended. He has been using the proceeds from his grain sales to maintain an extravagant lifestyle and to purchase influence at court. If his supply of illicit income is threatened, he may act desperately to preserve it. Kenty nodded slowly. So we wait. We observe, Lady Neferat corrected. You and I will be positioned to witness his arrival without being seen ourselves. The temple officials will be stationed separately with their own observers. If Panicamway appears as we expect, we will have him. As twilight descended over Thebes, Kenty found himself huddled in the shadows of a disused boat shed, roughly 50 paces from the abandoned storage building where Panicamway had been summoned to meet his supposed Hittite contact. Beside him, Lady Neferat was a silent presence, her dark cloak rendering her nearly invisible in the gathering darkness. The air was cooler here near the river, carrying the scents of water, fish, and the various goods that passed through the docks daily. In the distance, the royal palace gleamed white in the moonlight, its grandeur a stark contrast to the grimy utilitarian structures of the harbour district. Someone is coming, Lady Neferat whispered, touching Kentis's arm to direct his attention. A figure moved cautiously along the path from the city, pausing occasionally to look around before continuing. Even in the dim light, The tall, slender silhouette was unmistakable. Panikamwe had taken the bait. He approached the storage building warily, circling it once before approaching the door. As he reached for the handle, a second figure emerged from the shadows behind him. "Who is that?" Kenti whispered, tensing. "That is not one of your agents." Lady Nefret leaned forward, straining to see. "No," she breathed. "It is his nephew, Amenemope. He must have brought him as protection." They watched as Panikamwe spoke briefly with his nephew, who then took up a position outside the door as his uncle entered the building. Inside, Kemsit waited with a carefully rehearsed story about a shipment of grain that could be diverted. 2 Hittite merchants for double the usual payment. Minutes passed in tense silence. From their vantage point, Kenti and Lady Nefret could see other shadows, the temple officials and their witnesses, positioned around the building to observe from different angles. Suddenly, the door of the storage building burst open. Panic emerged, moving quickly, his face visible for a moment in the moonlight contorted with anger. He grabbed his nephew's arm, speaking urgently. "Something's wrong," Kenti said. "Hayes leaving too soon." Lady Nefret's hand tightened on his arm. "Wait. We need to hear what the merchant tells us before we act." But they had no chance to wait. Panikamwe and his nephew were already moving rapidly away from the building, heading not back toward the city but along the riverbank in the direction of a small dock where several boats were moored. Hayes fleeing, Kenti realized aloud. He must have sensed the trap. Without waiting for Lady Nefret's response, he rose and began to follow, keeping to the shadows. After a moment's hesitation, she joined him, moving silently in her thin sandals, while Kentis's own footfalls seemed thunderous in comparison. They tracked the 2 figures to the small dock, where Panikamwe was now engaged in heated negotiation. With a boatman, coins changed hands, and the boatman began preparing his vessel for immediate departure. "We cannot let him escape," Lady Nefret whispered urgently. "If he flees now, he will claim he was merely visiting the docks for innocent reasons and will deny ever entering the building. Without him being caught in the act of negotiating with the supposed Hittite agent, we have no proof." Kenti made a split-second decision. "Alert the others. I will delay him." Before she could protest, he moved out of the shadows and strode purposefully toward the dock, no longer the cautious spy, but once again the confident nobleman. "Overseer Panikamwe," he called out, his voice carrying clearly over the water. "What a surprising place to encounter you at this hour." Panikamwe froze, then turned slowly, his face a mask of controlled rage. "Lord Semet, I might say the same of you. The docks are an unusual evening destination for a southern landowner." Kenti approached until he stood at the end of the dock, effectively blocking the path to the boat unless Panikamwe wished to physically push past him. "I find the river peaceful at night," Kenti replied casually. "But you seem in quite a hurry. Traveling somewhere?" "My movements are none of your concern," Panikamwe snapped, his usual courtly manner evaporating. "Step aside." "I think not," Kenti said, standing his ground. "Not until you explain why you met with a known associate of Hittite merchants in a storage building at this unusual hour." Panikamwe's eyes narrowed. "You have been following me. This is an outrage. To spy on a royal official is a crime punishable by death. Is it a greater crime than selling royal grain to foreign powers?" Kenti countered. "Than betraying the trust of divine Pharaoh?" By now, Amenemope had moved to his uncle's side, one hand resting on the dagger at his belt. The boatman, sensing trouble, had retreated to the far end of his vessel, clearly wanting no part in the confrontation. "You have no proof of such absurd accusations," Panikamwe hissed. "Only fabricated testimony from a farmer masquerading as nobility." The words struck Kenti like a physical blow. "What did you say?" A cold smile spread across Panikamwe's face. "Did you think I would not investigate the mysterious Lord Senimut, who appeared so suddenly after such a long absence? My messengers worked faster than you anticipated, it seems. They returned this afternoon with interesting news. The real Senimut was seen in his villa near Elephantine just 3 days ago, quite alive, despite rumors of his death." Kenti felt the blood drain from his face. This was unexpected. Lady Nefrit had assured him the real Senimut was dead. "You are lying," he managed, though doubt crept into his voice. "Am I?" Panikamwe stepped closer, confidence growing as he sensed Kenti's uncertainty. "I have witnesses who will testify before Pharaoh tomorrow. Your deception will be exposed, and you, along with whoever put you up to this charade, will face execution for impersonating nobility and attempting to mislead divine Pharaoh." In that moment, Kenti realized the full extent of their miscalculation. They had built their entire plan on the assumption that the real Senimut was dead and could not contradict their deception. If Panikamwe was telling the truth, the real Lord lived then, not only would their scheme fail, but Kenti, the governor, and Lady Neferet would face the most severe punishment. But there was something odd about Panikamwe's claim. If he had truly received such devastating evidence, why had he not immediately brought it to the Pharaoh? Why was he attempting to flee by river in the middle of the night? "If what you say is true," Kenti said, playing for time, "then why run? Why not present your evidence at court tomorrow and watch me fall?" A flicker of unease crossed Panikamwe's face. "I run from nothing. I merely choose to conduct my business without your interference. Business that requires secret meetings and midnight river journeys," Kenti pressed, his confidence returning. "I think your claim about the real Senimut is as false as your loyalty to Pharaoh." Panikamwe's composure cracked. "Enough, Amenemope. Remove this impostor from our path." The nephew drew his dagger and advanced on Kenti, who found himself backing up, unarmed and untrained in combat. But before Amenemope could reach him, shouts erupted from the riverbank. Lady Nefret had returned with the temple officials and their witnesses, along with several royal guards. "Seize them," ordered a commanding voice. "By order of divine Pharaoh." Panikamwe looked wildly from the approaching guards to the boat, clearly calculating his chances of escape. But it was too late. The dock was surrounded, and the boatman, sensing which way the wind was blowing, had already pushed off from the dock, abandoning his passenger to save himself. As the guards closed in, Panikamwe's face contorted with hatred as he glared at Kenti. "This is not over, farmer," he spat. "Truth has a way of revealing itself, even in the house of lies that is the royal court." But his threats rang hollow. As the guards bound his wrists and led him away, the trap had worked, though not exactly as planned. Panikamwe had been caught attempting to flee after a secret meeting, suspicious behavior that would require explanation before the Pharaoh. Lady Nefret approached Kenti as the guards departed with their prisoners. "You took a great risk confronting him directly," she said, her voice containing both admonishment and admiration. "He claims the real Senimut is alive," Kenti responded, searching her face for the truth. "That his messengers saw him just days ago." Lady Nefret's expression did not waver. A desperate lie. The governor confirmed Senimut's death through multiple sources. Panikamwe is attempting to sow doubt because he knows his position is crumbling. Kenty wanted to believe her, but uncertainty lingered. And if he is telling the truth, if the real Senemet appears at court? She placed a hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly warm in the cool night air. Then we face our fate together. But I do not think we need fear that particular ghost. As they made their way back toward the palace, Kenty found himself wondering which was the greater deception, Panikamwe's crimes or the elaborate fiction that he himself had become. And more disturbing still, he wondered which role felt more real to him now, Kenty the farmer or Lord Senemet the nobleman. Chapter 12. Truth and Consequences. The great hall of judgment was silent save for the soft footfalls of the guards, and the occasional rustle of linen robes as officials shifted in their seats. Unlike the usual audience chamber, this space was designed for formal judicial proceedings, its walls painted with scenes of the gods weighing the hearts of the dead against the feather of truth. Today, it was the living who would be judged. Pharaoh Thutmose sat upon a raised dais, the crook and flail of his office held across his chest. To his right stood the high priest of Amen. To his left, the commander of the royal guard. Arranged before them in a semicircle were the royal viziers, scribes, and high officials who would witness the proceedings. Kenty still maintaining his identity as Lord Senemet stood to one side, his heart racing despite his outward calm. Beside him was Lady Neferet, her face composed and unreadable behind a light application of ceremonial makeup. Opposite them, guarded by 4 soldiers, stood Panikamwe and his nephew Amenemop. The once proud overseer of granaries now looked diminished, his fine robes replaced by simpler garments, his jewelry confiscated, his expression a mixture of fear and simmering rage. The court herald struck the floor 3 times with his staff. The divine judgment of Pharaoh Thutmose, living Horus, Lord of the 2 lands, begins. Let all speak truth in his sacred presence, knowing that falsehood pollutes the breath of life. Itself, the phraseology was ritual, but the warning it contained was very real. To lie before the Pharaoh was not merely a crime, but a spiritual transgression, an offense against the cosmic order that governed all existence. The high judge, an elderly man named Usamontu, rose to present the case. Divine One, before you stand accused Panikamwe, formerly overseer of the royal granaries, and his nephew Amenemop, charged with misappropriation of royal property, conspiracy with foreign powers, and attempted flight to avoid royal justice. Usamontu gestured to where Kenty and Lady Neferet stood. The accusations were brought by Lord Senemet of Elephantine, and supported by evidence gathered under the authority of Lady Neferet, wife of Governor Omenhart. The Pharaoh made a small gesture to proceed. The accused was observed entering a meeting with a known associate of Hittite merchants. Usamontu continued. When confronted, he attempted to flee by boat under cover of darkness. These actions alone suggest consciousness of guilt. Panikamwe stepped forward, bowing deeply before speaking. Divine One, I have served the 2 lands faithfully for 20 years. These accusations are the result of a calculated plot by Governor Amenhart, who seeks to expand his influence by removing those loyal to your divine person. His voice gained strength as he continued. As for my presence at the docks, I received information that suspicious activities were taking place there. Perhaps the very grain theft that Lord Senemet has accused me of. I went to investigate personally, not trusting such a sensitive matter to subordinates. It was a clever defense, Kenty had to admit. Panikamwe was presenting his actions as dutiful investigation rather than criminal activity. And your attempt to depart by boat, Usamontu asked, skeptically. A precaution. Panic-Moy replied smoothly. When I observed Lord Senemet following me, I grew concerned. Given his earlier false accusations against me, I feared for my safety and sought to return to the palace by river rather than risking confrontation in the dark streets. The pharaoh's expression remained unreadable, but several of the officials exchanged glances that suggested the explanation, while convenient, was not entirely convincing. There is another matter to address, Panic-Amway continued, his eyes now fixing on Kenti with undisguised malice. The legitimacy of the accuser. Himself, I have received reports that the real Lord Senemet was seen alive at his estates near Elephantine mere days ago. This man before you is an impostor, placed in court by Governor Armenhart to undermine my position. A murmur ran through the assembled officials. This was the moment Kenti had feared since their confrontation at the docks. If Panic-Amway truly had witnesses who could testify to seeing the real Senemet, his deception would be exposed and all would be lost. Lady Neferet stepped forward. Divine One, if I may address this outlandish claim. The pharaoh nodded permission. These supposed reports are convenient fabrications designed to distract from Panic-Amway's own crimes, she said, her voice clear and confident. Lord Senemet's identity has been verified by multiple sources, including Commander Senbi, who served with him in the Nubian campaigns. Furthermore, we have received troubling information that Panic-Brimway may have arranged for harm to come to the real Senemet, fearing his knowledge of grain operations in the south. This bold counter-accusation, suggesting that Panic-Amway himself might be responsible for the real Senemet's disappearance, was a gamble that Kenti had not anticipated. It shifted the burden of proof back to Panic-Amway while casting further suspicion on his character. This is absurd, Panic-Amway protested. I demand that messengers be sent to Elephantine to verify the truth. They already have been, came a new voice from the entrance to the hall. All heads turned to see Governor Armenhart himself entering, accompanied by several officials and a man Kenti did not recognize, middle-aged. Nobleman dressed in the style of the southern provinces. Divine One, all men had said, bowing deeply before the pharaoh. Forgive my unexpected arrival, but I bring information critical to these proceedings. Allow me to present Lord Paheri, cousin to the late Lord Senemet, and administrator of his estates. The nobleman stepped forward and bowed. Divine One, I can confirm that my cousin Senemet died 3 seasons ago while hunting. As his nearest relative, I have administered his lands since then, though the matter of formal inheritance remains to be settled by the royal courts. Panic-Amway's face drained of color. This is impossible, he whispered, though loud enough to be heard, in the hushed chamber. My messengers, your messengers, were intercepted carrying forged documents claiming to have seen Lord Senemet alive. Governor Armenhart interrupted. When questioned, they admitted being paid to deliver this false testimony. They await your divine judgment in the palace prison. Kenti fought to keep his expression neutral, though his mind raced. This development was as surprising to him as it clearly was to Panic-Amway. Had the governor and Lady Neferet anticipated Panic-Amway's move and counted it in advance? Or was this Lord Paheri, another impersonator, part of an even more elaborate deception than the one in which Kenti himself was entangled? The pharaoh leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Panic-Amway. These are serious allegations from respected officials, he said, his voice surprisingly soft, yet carrying an undercurrent of steel. What say you to them? Panic-Amway fell to his knees. Divine One, I am the victim of a coordinated plot. Governor Ormenhart has long sought to control the distribution of grain throughout the two lands. My oversight of the royal granaries stood in his way. These fabricated charges are designed to remove me from my position so that he may extend his influence. It was a desperate defense, but not without a certain logic. Court politics often revolved around exactly such power struggles. You have yet to explain the documented discrepancies in the royal granary accounts, you Sermontu pointed out, or the testimony of multiple witnesses who observed grain being diverted to private vessels. Administrative errors, Panicumway insisted, and the testimony of disgruntled workers seeking to curry favor with a new regime they see rising against me. The pharaoh raised a hand for silence, his gaze moving from Panicumway to Kenty, then to Governor Ormenhart and Lady Nef. I have heard enough accusations and counter-accusations, he said. Now I will hear from one who has no stake in this power struggle. He gestured, and a side door opened to admit a thin, nervous-looking man whom Kenty recognized as Kem's, the merchant who had been positioned in the storage building as the supposed Hittite contact. You are the merchant who met with Overseer Panicumway last night, the pharaoh stated rather than asked. Kemsit prostrated himself, trembling visibly. Yes, Divine One. You will tell this court the nature of your relationship with the accused and what transpired at your meeting. Kemsit rose to his knees, keeping his head bowed. Divine One, I have served as an intermediary between Overseer Panicumway and certain foreign merchants for the past 2 years. My role has been to arrange for royal grain to be diverted to these merchants in exchange for silver, which I delivered to the overseer. Lies, Panicumway shouted. This man is a common criminal coerced into giving false testimony. Pharaoh silenced him with a gesture. Continue, he instructed Kemsid. Last night, I was to meet with the overseer to discuss a particularly large shipment. However, shortly after he arrived, he accused me of setting a trap. He said he had learned that temple officials were watching the building, and he departed immediately. The pharaoh's eyes narrowed. And how did you come to be involved in this arrangement initially? Kemsit swallowed hard. The overseer approached me after catching me smuggling foreign wine without paying proper duties. He offered to overlook my crime in exchange for my services as an intermediary. A pattern was emerging. Panicumway, using his position to identify vulnerable individuals who could be coerced or bribed into serving his schemes. It was a sophisticated approach to corruption, one that would have been difficult to expose without catching him in the act. The pharaoh sat in silence for several moments, considering all he had heard. The chamber was utterly still, every person present acutely aware that they were witnessing a pivotal moment in the power structure of the two lands. Finally, he spoke. Panicumway, former overseer of the royal granaries, I find the evidence of your crimes compelling. You have betrayed your sacred duty, stolen from the royal storehouses, conspired with foreign powers, and attempted to mislead divine justice through false accusations. Panicumway collapsed fully to the floor, all dignity abandoned. Mercy, Divine One. I have served the two lands faithfully for many years. Your punishment will reflect both your crimes and your position of trust, the pharaoh continued. Unmoved by the plea, you were sentenced to labor in the quarries of Torah for the remainder of your life. Your property is forfeit to the crown. Your name shall be removed from all monuments and records, that you may be forgotten by history and your soul find no rest in the afterlife. It was the most severe punishment, short of executioner, living death, followed by spiritual obliteration. Even hardened officials looked away as Panicumway wept openly on the floor. As for his nephew, the pharaoh added, turning to Amenemope. He will be exiled to the southern frontier fortress of Bun, where he may serve Egypt by watching for Nubian raiders. His property, too, is forfeit. Guards moved forward to remove the condemned men. As they were led away, panic, Way turned one last time to glare at Kenty. His eyes filled with a hatred that transcended his present circumstances. In that gaze was a promise that, somehow, he would have revenge for his downfall. Once they had been removed, the pharaoh addressed the remaining officials. The position of overseer of the royal granaries must not remain vacant. Governor Omenhart, I charge you with recommending suitable candidates for this vital office. The governor bowed deeply. Divine One, if I may be so bold, I would suggest Lord Senemet for your consideration. His knowledge of agricultural matters in the southern provinces would bring valuable expertise to the management of our grain supplies. Kenty felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. This was exactly what Lady Nefret had suggested. In the garden that he might permanently assume not just the identity of Lord Senemet, but a position of genuine power within the court. The pharaoh's gaze turned to Kenty, studying him with new interest. An intriguing suggestion. Lord Senemet, would you be willing to undertake such responsibility? All eyes in the chamber were now upon him. This was the moment of decision. Step fully into the life that chance and deception had opened to him, or to somehow find a way back to the truth of his origins. But what was that truth now? Was he still Kenty, the farmer in his heart? Or had he become, in some essential way, the nobleman he had been pretending to be? Looking into the pharaoh's eyes, Kenty made his choice. Divine One, I am honored by the governor's recommendation and your divine consideration. If it pleases you, I would serve Egypt and the two lands to the best of my ability in whatever capacity you deem appropriate. A small smile touched the pharaoh's lips, perhaps the first genuine emotion he had displayed throughout the proceedings. Very well, you will work alongside the governor for one season to learn the duties of the office. If you prove capable, the position will be yours permanently. With that pronouncement, Kenty's transformation was complete. The masquerade had become reality. The farmer who had once bathed in the Nile, watching the nobles pass by on their barges, was now one of them, not just in appearance, but in function and authority. As the court session concluded and officials began to disperse, Lady Nefret approached him, her expression composed, but her eyes bright with triumph. Congratulations, Lord Senemort, she said, emphasizing his title. It seems our collaboration has benefited both of us significantly. Indeed, he replied, suddenly aware of the vast gulf that now existed between his past and his present. Though I find myself wondering what becomes of Kenty now. She studied him for a moment before answering. Kenty served his purpose, and then, like many humble men, simply disappeared into the pages of history, unnamed and unremembered. But Senemet, her hand touched his arm briefly. Senemet may yet make a name that will be recorded on monuments and remembered for generations. With those words, she departed, leaving him to contemplate the strange journey that had brought him from the banks of the Nile to the highest echelons of power, and to wonder what price he might ultimately pay for trading one identity for another. Chapter 13. The Scales of Mart. 1 year after Panikimwe's disgrace, the royal barge glided serenely along the Nile, its gilded prow cutting through the water with barely a sound. Beneath a canopy of fine linen that provided shelter from the midday sun, Kenty, now firmly established as Lord Senemet, overseer of the royal granaries, sat in conversation with Lady Nep. The past year had transformed him in ways both visible and invisible. His bearing had the natural confidence that comes from genuine authority rather than careful imitation. His knowledge of administration, agriculture, and court politics had grown exponentially under the tutelage of both the governor and Lady Neferet. Even his body had changed, the last vestiges of a farmer's physique replaced by the slightly softer form of a nobleman who commanded rather than labored. "The southern harvest exceeds expectations," he was saying, consulting a papyrus scroll, covered in neat hieratic script. "Even accounting for the floods being lower than ideal, the new irrigation techniques have compensated admirably." Lady Neferet nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And the distribution plans?" "I have allocated additional stores to the villages that suffered from grain fever last season. The physicians report that proper nutrition should prevent a recurrence." A small smile curved her lips. A compassionate decision, not one that Panicumway would have made. "No," Kenty agreed. "But perhaps that is why the gods arranged his downfall and my ... ascension." The word choice was deliberate, acknowledging the strange twist of fate or divine intervention that had raised him from the lowest tier of society to one of its highest. He had come to accept, if not fully understand, the bizarre journey that had brought him here. The barge was passing a small village on the riverbank, not unlike the one where Kenty had once lived. Field workers paused in their labor to watch the royal vessel glide past, shading their eyes against the sun, their expressions a mixture of awe and resignation at the unbridgeable distance between their lives and those of the passengers on board. Kenty watched them, feeling a complex emotion he could not entirely name. Not guilt, exactly, for he had used his position to implement policies that genuinely improved conditions for farmers throughout the two lands. Not nostalgia, for he remembered all too well the grinding hardship of that existence. Perhaps it was simply awareness, the uncommon ability to truly see both worlds from the inside. "You are pensive today," Lady Neferet observed. "I was thinking about the nature of identity," he replied, "about how completely one life can disappear into another." She studied him with those perceptive eyes that had first marked him as a useful tool and later come to regard him as something closer to an equal. "Do you regret the transformation?" Kenty considered the question seriously. "No," he said, finally, "but sometimes I wonder if Kenty truly died when Senemet was born, or if he continues to exist somewhere beneath the surface, observing this new life with perpetual amazement." "Perhaps both exist simultaneously," Lady Neferet suggested. "The wisdom of the farmer informing the decisions of the nobleman. It is a unique perspective that makes you valuable beyond the typical court official." The barge continued its stately progress upstream. They were traveling to Thebes for an important ceremony, the dedication of a new granary complex that Kenty had designed, incorporating innovations that would better preserve grain and make distribution more efficient. It was to be named in his honor, ensuring that the name Senemet would indeed be recorded for posterity. "Have you heard any news of Panicumway?" he asked, changing the subject. Lady Neferet's expression darkened slightly. "The last reports indicated he still lives, though the quarries have taken their toll. Few survive such punishment for more than 2 or 3 years." Kenty nodded, feeling neither satisfaction nor pity at this information. Panicumway had created his own fate through greed and arrogance, yet there remained an uncomfortable parallel. Between them both had lived lives built on deception, though two vastly different ends. "And the governor, will he join us in Thebes?" "No," Lady Neferet replied. "He remains in the northern provinces, overseeing the preparation of new agricultural lands. The expansion project is his primary focus now. There was something in her tone that suggested the governor's absence was neither coincidental nor unwelcome. Over the past year, Kenty had observed the subtle distancing between Lady Neferet and her husband. As Kenty's own influence had grown, he had become less their puppet and more their equiland in Lady Neferet's case, perhaps something more. The nature of their relationship had evolved in ways neither of them openly acknowledged. A touch that lingered longer than propriety dictated. Conversations that continued late into the night. Shared secrets and ambitions spoken in the privacy of garden alcoves or quiet chambers. Nothing improper had occurred, yet the potential hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. "You never told me," Kenty said suddenly, "how you and the governor identified me as a suitable candidate for your scheme. Was it truly just the chance encounter at the river that morning?" Lady Neferet's gaze turned toward the distant shoreline before answering. "Not entirely. We had been observing several potential candidates for some time, men of suitable build, and features who might plausibly resemble Senemet after proper grooming. Men without family connections who would not be missed. Men who showed a certain intelligence beyond their station. You were watching me before that day." "Yes," she admitted, "though the final decision was indeed made when I saw you. At the river, there was something in your eyes when you looked at me, not just resentment of my privilege, which was common enough, but a question, an analysis. You were not simply accepting the order of things as immutable. You were wondering why it existed as it did. That capacity for critical thought made you ideal." Kenty absorbed this information, unsure whether to be disturbed by the calculation behind what he had thought was chance, or impressed by the thoroughness of their planning. "And now," he asked, "now that I am no longer your creation, but a power in my own right, what am I to you now, Lady Neferet?" She turned to face him fully, her expression unguarded in a way he had rarely seen. "A partner, perhaps. Someone who understands both worlds as I never could, despite my sympathy. For the common people, someone who might work alongside me to reshape those worlds into something more balanced." The implication was clear. She envisioned not just a personal alliance, but a political one, using their combined influence to implement reforms that would distribute Egypt's vast wealth more equitably, while maintaining the stability of the kingdom. Before Kenty could respond, a servant approached to inform them that they were nearing Thebes. The moment of intimacy passed as they both turned their attention to the approaching city, its temples and palaces gleaming white against the green of irrigated fields, and the harsh yellow of the desert beyond. As they disembarked at the royal dock, a delegation awaited them. Officials, priests, and nobles assembled to escort them to the palace. Among them stood a figure Kenty recognized with a jolt of shock, Panikamoy's nephew, Amenhotep. "What is he doing here?" Kenty whispered urgently to Lady Neferet. "I thought he was exiled to the southern frontier." "He was," she replied, her own surprise evident. "He must have been recalled, though I received no notification of such a decision." They had no opportunity for further discussion as protocol demanded their immediate attention to the welcoming ceremony. But throughout the procession to the palace, Kenty was acutely aware of Amenhotep's presence in the delegation, the young man's eyes following him with undisguised hatred. Later that evening, as Kenty prepared for the formal banquet, a servant delivered a small pottery token, the signal he and Lady Neferet still used when they needed to speak privately on urgent matters. Following the token's direction, he made his way to a small shrine within the palace complex, dedicated to Thoth, god of wisdom and writing. Lady Neferet was already there, her face drawn with concern in the flickering light of oil lamps. Amenemope has been pardoned and reinstated to a minor court position, she said without preamble. Apparently, he convinced the pharaoh that he was an unwitting accomplice to his uncle's schemes, too young and naive to understand the implications of what he was asked to do. "Do you believe that?" Kenty asked. Not for a moment. He was fully complicit, but more concerning is why he has returned now, just as we arrive for this ceremony. Kenty understood her worry. "You think he seeks revenge?" "I know he does. The question is what form it will take." She moved closer, lowering her voice further, though they were alone in the shrine. "Be vigilant, Kenty. Watch what you eat and drink. Keep loyal servants near you at all times. Amenemope is less sophisticated than his uncle, but that may make him more dangerous, more likely to attempt direct action rather than subtle manipulation." The warning was timely. Throughout the banquet that evening, Kenty noticed Amenemope watching him from his position at a lower table. The young man's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes burned with an intensity that left no doubt about his feelings. The ceremony the following day proceeded without incident. Kenty delivered a speech about the importance of proper grain storage and equitable distribution, dedicated the new facility in the name of Pharaoh Thutmose, and received the acclaim of assembled officials and priests. It was a moment of genuine pride, not just in the maintenance of his disguise, but in his actual accomplishments over the past year. As the formal proceedings concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Amenemope approached him directly for the first time. "Congratulations, Lord Senemet," he said, his voice carefully modulated to reveal nothing of his true feelings. "Your rise has been ... meteoric." "Thank you," Kenty replied cautiously. "I am merely grateful for the opportunity to serve." The two lands, Amenemope smiled, a gesture that never reached his eyes. Indeed, opportunity can arise from the most unexpected circumstances, can it not? One day a man is nothing, the next he is everything or appears to be. The threat was veiled but unmistakable. Somehow Amenemope suspected or knew of Kenty's true origins. "Be careful with such cryptic statements," Kenty warned quietly. "They might be misinterpreted as something other than the congratulations they purport to be." "Oh, I am always careful, Lord Senemet, more careful than my uncle was, and more patient." Amenemope bowed slightly. "I look forward to observing your continued evolution at court." With that parting shot, he melted back into the crowd, leaving Kenty with the distinct impression that a new game had begun, one potentially more dangerous than the deception that had brought him to power. That evening, as Kenty stood on the balcony of his chambers in the royal palace, watching the light fade over the Nile, he found himself at a crossroads of reflection. The past year had been a journey of transformation, from the desperate gamble of a hungry farmer to the calculated decisions of a powerful official. He had improved the lives of countless common people through his policies, while also securing his own position and comfort. But at what cost to his soul? The Egyptian concept of truth, balance, justice was not merely a philosophical ideal, but a spiritual necessity. According to their beliefs, upon death, each person's heart would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at. Those whose hearts were heavier than the feather burdened by sin, dishonesty, or injustice would be devoured by Emet, the soul-eating demon, denied eternal life in the afterlife. By living a fundamental lie about his very identity, Was Kenty condemning himself to such a fate? Or would the good he had done and continued to do balance the scales? As darkness fell completely and the stars emerged in the night sky, made a decision. He would continue as Lord Senemet, using his position to create positive change. But he would find ways, however small, to honor the truth of his origins, to keep Kenty, the farmer, alive within the nobleman he had become. And he would watch for Amenemope, knowing that the young man's patience, like his own, would eventually give way to action. When that moment came, he would need all the wisdom of both his identities to survive. The game of power in ancient Egypt was as eternal as the flow of the Nile itself. It had existed before him and would continue long after he was gone. His challenge was not merely to play it well, but to change its rules, even slightly, toward greater justice. As he turned from the balcony to prepare for sleep, Kenty Lord Senemet felt a strange peace settle over him. The scales of Marat might yet balance in his favor, not despite his deception, but because of what he had chosen to do with the power it had granted him. Epilogue: The Two Lives. 5 years later, a simple reed boat drifted along a quiet stretch of the Nile, far from the grand palaces and temples of Thebes or Memphis. Its sole occupant was a man dressed in plain linen, his head covered not with the elaborate wig of nobility, but with a simple cloth wrapped around his shaved scalp. His hands, though softer than they once had been, gripped the steering oar with the confidence of one who had grown up along these waters. Lord Senemet, still overseer of the royal granaries, and now also a member of the pharaoh's inner council, had developed a habit that puzzled his fellow officials and servants. Once each season, he would disappear for several days, taking no entourage, no guards, and no symbols of his rank. He would return refreshed, he claimed, by simple communion with the land he helped to administer. What none knew was that during these sojourns, he returned as closely as possible to his origins. He would visit remote villages, sometimes working alongside farmers in their fields, listening to their concerns and observing their conditions firsthand. He would sleep on red mats in simple huts, eat the coarse bread and thin beer of the common people, and remember viscerally what life was like for the majority of Egypt's population. Today, he was approaching the village where he had once lived as Kenty the farmer. He rarely came this close to his former home, fearing recognition, but something had drawn him back on this particular journey. Perhaps it was the recent completion of a new irrigation system that he had designed specifically to benefit this region. Perhaps it was simple nostalgia, or perhaps it was a need to measure the distance between who he had been and who he had become, as his boat rounded a bend in the river. The village came into view, a cluster of mud brick homes nestled against the fertile black soil of the floodplain. Children played along the riverbank while women washed clothing in the shallows. Men worked in the fields beyond, their backs bent to the eternal labor of agriculture. Kenty guided his boat to a small landing and secured it, then made his way up the bank toward the heart of the village. It had changed little in the years since he had left. The same smells of dung fires and baking bread filled the air. The same flies gathered around the eyes of playing children. The same quiet resignation seemed to hang over the community, acceptance that this was life as the gods had ordained it. Yet there were differences too. The grain storage building was newer and better constructed, built according to designs he had implemented throughout Egypt. The children appeared healthier, less gaunt. Several homes boasted small improvements: a proper door, a better roof, a tiny garden of vegetables. As he walked through the village, he was just another traveler passing through, unremarkable and unrecognized. The complete transformation of his appearance, bearing, and manner ensured that no one connected this visitor with the farmer who had disappeared years ago. Most likely, Kenty had been forgotten entirely, or was remembered only as someone who had perhaps been conscripted for a building project and never returned. A common enough fate. Near the center of the village, he paused to watch an elderly woman instructing younger women in the grinding of grain between stones. With a start, he recognized Tourette, the widow who had once given him bread when he was hungry. She had aged considerably, her back now curved, her movements slower, but her eyes still held the same kindness he remembered. For a moment, he was tempted to approach her, to reveal himself, to thank her for that small act of generosity that stood in his memory as a counterpoint to all the calculated power plays of court life. But he knew such a revelation would only confuse and possibly frighten her. The gap between who he had been and who he was now had grown too vast to bridge with simple explanation. Instead, he purchased a loaf of fresh bread from a nearby baker and approached her with the offering. "For you, mother," he said, using the respectful term for an elder woman. "May the gods honor your wisdom and your years." Tourette looked up, surprised by the gesture from a stranger. "Thank you, traveler," she replied, accepting the bread with gnarled hands. "The gods smile on those who show kindness to the old." "I was told by others that you are known for your generosity," Kenty said truthfully, "that you share what little you have even in times of scarcity." She chuckled softly. "What good is having anything if not to share it? We all drink from the same Nile, after all." The simple wisdom in her words struck Kenty profoundly. Here was Marat in its purest form, not the complex theological concept debated by priests, but the basic understanding that balance and reciprocity were the foundations of a good life. "Indeed we do," he agreed. "May your kindness return to you many times over." As he turned to continue his walk through the village, Tourette called after him, "You remind me of someone, traveler, something in your eyes." Kenty froze momentarily, then composed himself and turned back with a smile. "I have one of those common faces, I suppose. Good day to you, mother." He moved on quickly, his heart racing slightly. It was time to leave before someone made a connection, however vague. At the edge of the village, where the cultivated land gave way to desert, stood a small shrine dedicated to Osiris, god of death and rebirth. Kenty paused there, making a simple offering of incense and speaking a prayer not for himself but for the people of the village, his people, still in some essential way. As he completed his prayer, a shadow fell across the shrine. Turning, he found himself facing a young farmer, perhaps 20 summers old, with the lean, muscular build that came from daily physical labor. "You are not from this village," the young man stated, more curious than hostile. "No," Kenty admitted. "Just passing through, paying respects to the gods." The farmer nodded, accepting this explanation. "The harvest will be good this year. The new irrigation channels bring water to fields that were previously difficult to flood." "I am glad to hear it," Kenty replied sincerely. "Was this improvement recently made?" "Yes, on the orders of the overseer of granaries. They say Lord Sentiment." The farmer pronounced a name with a mixture of respect and distance, as one might name a distant star visible but incomprehensibly remote from ordinary life. "They say he was once a common man who rose to power through unusual circumstances." Kenty raised an eyebrow, surprised that such rumors had reached this far. "Do they? And what else do they say about him?" The young farmer shrugged. "That he implements policies that help ordinary farmers rather than just enriching the nobility." that he remembers what it means to work the land. Some even say he was a farmer himself once, though that seems unlikely. Why unlikely? Kenty asked, genuinely curious about the young man's perspective. How would a farmer learn to read and write, to understand administration, to navigate court politics? No, more likely he was from the lower nobility or a merchant family, someone with some education who understands trade. Kenty nodded, neither confirming nor denying this assessment. And you? What do you hope for in your life? The question seemed to surprise the young farmer. Me, I hope for what all men hope for: enough food for my family, healthy children, perhaps a slightly larger plot of land someday. The gods determine our paths, do they, entirely? Kenty pressed gently. The young man considered this. Perhaps not entirely. A man can work harder, think more carefully, take calculated risks, but the circumstances of our birth set boundaries that few can cross. Yet you just spoke of a high official who may have risen from common origins, the exception that proves the rule, the farmer replied with a shrug, or merely a pleasing fiction that gives false hope to those who will never rise. The cynicism in one so young saddened Kenty, though he understood its roots all too well. He had once felt the resignation that comes from seeing no path forward, no possibility of significant change. What if it were true? He asked. What if a man could indeed rise from the humblest origins to a position of power? What should such a man do with that power? The young farmer looked at him curiously, perhaps wondering why a passing stranger would pose such philosophical questions. But he answered thoughtfully. He should remember where he came from. Use his position to ease the burdens of those he left behind, create opportunities for others to advance through merit rather than birth. He paused, then added with a small smile, but this is idle speculation. Such things happen in tales told by firelight, not in the world of the two. Lance Kenty nodded, though he knew differently. Perhaps, but tales can inspire reality, sometimes. They parted ways soon after, the young farmer returning to his fields, Kenty making his way back to his boat. As he pushed off from the shore and began his journey back toward Thebes and the life that awaited him there, he felt a renewed clarity of purpose. His dual existence, the nobility he performed daily, and the humility he returned to periodically, was not merely a personal quirk or a safety measure against discovery. It was essential to his ability to effect change. By keeping one foot in each world, he could serve as a bridge between them, using the power and knowledge of one to address the needs and realities of the other. Lady Neferet had understood this from the beginning. In the years since their conspiracy against panic, their partnership had deepened into something more complex than court alliance or romantic attachment, though elements of both existed. They had become collaborators in a long-term project to reform Egypt's governance from within, making small but significant changes that improved conditions for the common people while maintaining the stability of the kingdom. The threat from Amenemop had never materialized in the direct way they had feared. Instead, the young man had adopted a strategy of patience, building his own network of allies, waiting for Kenty to make a mistake that would expose his false identity. But as years passed and Lord Senemet became more firmly established, with accomplishments and relationships that stood on their own merits, the possibility of such exposure became less threatening. Who would care, after 5 years of effective leadership, if the man known as Senemet had once been a farmer named Kenty? The results of his work spoke for themselves. The elaborate deception that had brought him to power had become almost incidental to what he had done with that power once obtained. As his boat moved steadily northward, carried by the eternal current of the Nile, Kenty reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. From desperate hunger to unimaginable privilege, from powerlessness to significant influence, from a life constrained by birth to one shaped by choice and capability. The sun was setting, casting long shadows. Across the water, in the distant west, the massive tombs of pharaohs past stood silhouetted against the reddening sky, monuments to the Egyptian obsession with eternal life and remembrance. Kenty had no illusions about his own legacy. Despite his current status, he would never have a great tomb filled with treasures and decorated with scenes of his accomplishments. When he died, his body would be mummified according to his rank, placed in a modest tomb appropriate to a court official, and eventually forgotten as new dynasties rose and fell. But perhaps his true immortality lay elsewhere in the changes he had implemented, in the precedents he had established, in the lives he had improved through his unique perspective and the opportunities it had allowed him to create. In ancient Egypt, a land where change came slowly, if at all, where traditions, thousands of years old, dictated every aspect of life, he had become an agent of subtle but meaningful evolution, not through revolution or dramatic upheaval, but through the patient application of influence, guided by compassion and first-hand understanding. As darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had guided Egyptian boats for millennia, Kenty offered a silent prayer to the gods of his ancestors, not for personal glory or wealth or power, but for the wisdom to use well the extraordinary second life he had been granted. The prayer complete, he turned his attention back to steering his small craft, a solitary figure moving between worlds, carrying within himself the memories of hunger and the responsibilities of abundance, uniquely positioned to serve as a bridge between the two, in the endless cycle of Egyptian existence, birth, death, rebirth. Kenty, the farmer, had indeed died. But what had emerged from that death was neither fully Kenty nor fully the fictional sentiment, but something new, a man who contained both identities and transcended them, navigating the dangerous waters of power without drowning in its corrupting influence. And perhaps, when his heart was finally weighed against the feather of Maat, the scales would balance, not despite his life of necessary deception, but because of the truth it had ultimately served. Finn.